trying to get back to the basics of great products.
Power comes from sharing information.
I try to convince people to slow down.
Open.
This is the Soaked by Slush podcast.
Hello everyone. Welcome back to the Soaked by Slush podcast. My name is William von Rapalen and next to me is Isak Rautio.
Here I am.
And yeah, let's dive right into it without any further ado. So our guest today is Sophia Bendz. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
As we usually start off in this podcast, just so we don't screw up the introduction too much, we've found it much easier for the guest to tell a little bit about themselves and what they've done so far and also what you're doing now.
All right, yeah, I'd be happy to. So my name is Sophia Bendz. I'm based here in Stockholm, Sweden. I am a marketeer and storyteller by heart and trade. Started off my career actually as a risk management consultant at Deloitte, just to understand that I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life, but it was a great learning experience. Later on, I joined a PR firm and really enjoyed it, and I felt like I was in my right element. But then I met the Spotify founders early on in 2006. And then, of course, that sounded too exciting not to try it out. So I joined Spotify as the global marketing director. And it was my job to more or less handle anything that had to do with the user. So I ended up staying on for 8 years. And I had, probably the most fun I've ever had professionally. But also a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Because as you know, it's hard to build a company. But super rewarding. And I got to spend the last 5 years with Spotify in New York City when we launched in the US. And I saw the company grew from 0 users to over 100 million users. And I helped launch the company in 56 markets. So lots of lessons learned and wonderful experiences and many good friends from those years.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
After Spotify, I started angel investing more actively. And that led to me joining Atomico. What year was it? It must have been 2017. And then I stayed on for 4.5 years and I was promoted partner. So I looked after the sourcing activities in the Nordic region. And then I headed up their angel program. After a couple of years with Atomico, I felt the itch to go back to early stage investing. So since September 1st, I joined Cherry Ventures, which is a seed fund that are doing investments across Europe. And I'm still based in Stockholm and now focus on early stage investing.
Great. Yeah, you've managed a lot in a relatively short time, and we'll dive into Spotify more specifically towards the end of the episode. But I thought we'd focus on the marketing angle since you've obviously had a very interesting experience in a company that basically everyone knows or even uses nowadays. So, maybe from the VC perspective, since you've also now spent some time as a VC after the Spotify tenure, there's at the moment, at least here in Finland, we have some VCs that are very focused on investing in brand-driven companies since day one. So they want there to be a very clear brand with, perfect-looking materials and decks and also an identity, and they really feel that the brand is the number one ace up these companies' sleeves. But do you think that's truly what's important in the beginning of founding a company? Because then there's the other side of the coin where people, some investors say that, that's not important at all. You don't even need a pitch deck. You don't even need a logo, just sales and traction.
Yeah, I think it depends on when you invest, obviously. But for me, I wouldn't care too much about the kind of aesthetics if it's very early. But I would care about if I feel like the company has, I don't know what's it called, but maybe the equivalent of a soul. Because I think, the way you present the brand in how it looks and how it sounds and how you articulate yourself and the tone of voice you use, etc. Those are all things that you work out. But what you need to see or want to see very early on is the fact that there is some sort of the DNA in the company that will later on translate into a brand. So I would look for like what is the core mission and what's the bigger dream that this founder is pursuing, and that kind of the thing that makes his or her heart beat and make them go up every day to work hard, that is the energy that you want to later on translate into a brand. I don't know if it makes sense, but
yeah, it's an interesting.
Trying to get a sense of the soul of the company.
It's an interesting perspective. Do you think that the marketing communication in general has to do with, or how closely is it tied to the sort of internal identity of who the company is, and then you talked about translating that into some sort of expression of who they are. Can you speak a bit more on that? What are your thoughts around this?
I mean, at least from my perspective, I think it's crucial that things are aligned. So the dream and the passion of the founding team will kind of set the ground for the internal culture and the spirit of the company, if you like. And I think that is closely linked with the external way that the company communicates. If it would have been a big difference between the two, then I would have been a bit worried and thought about, is this, how solid is this? But almost like, when you get to know a new friend, like you want to understand who is this person, and then you want to see that person is consistently behaving in the same way, so that you build trust and you feel like you understand, who is this person and what motivates them, and it's easy for you to like them because they clearly present themselves.
Do you think there's any difference in early stage companies, at least, between if you're very consumer focused or if you have a consumer product, or if you're more focused on selling B2B, doing a platform, doing something like that? Does that change your perspective?
I mean, there are changes, of course, but I do think that either way, you have customers and you want to be super valuable to those customers. So you build a brand, even if you are a B2B company, whether you like it or not. And I normally think about it as sort of your brand is mostly not what you say you are, it's what the users say about you. That's actually what your brand is all about. So you can't force it upon everything or anyone. It's all of the different sort of activities and the ways you communicate and how your product is interpreted, etc. That together forms the impression and what makes up the brand.
Right. That's also a good perspective. Like if you think about like Mickey Mouse, like something that everyone knows, like it's easy to see that Mickey Mouse is Disney's property, it's their intellectual property, it's their copyright, it's their whatever, but it's not really. That's not really what it is. It's in every child's mind. It's in every adult's mind who grew up with Mickey Mouse. That's what it is. I don't know how do you have like your a definition for what a brand is? Like what's your sort of guiding idea of what building a brand is all about?
I normally come back to like, you need to figure out your why. Like why are you here and why do you matter? And also what type of role do you want to play in the consumer's life? Like whose hero do you want to be? And I think that is a question that you should ask yourself really early on and then build from there. And then, as a marketeer, you can, of course, bring on board really smart brand strategists and create this brand positioning document and use fancy language, etc. But in the end of the day, if you have internal documents, but you don't act that way externally, your consumers are not going to understand. So that's when I normally come back to like, you are what your consumers say you are. You're not what your brand internal documents say you are.
Yeah, because one perspective that we've heard from other founders or marketeers, or something we've encountered also in our personal entrepreneurial tracks, is that you need to be quite coherent to be believable. If you can't stay on brand, then no one can really understand what you are. And it's very easy to just have these fancy things or cool ads or do something charitable every once in a while. But if it's not tied to what you are, whose hero you want to be, as you put it, it seems that people won't believe you and it won't fly.
No, I completely agree. Consistency is really important. And there is a book by a psychologist called Robert Cialdini, and he lists 7 things that helps people to make up their mind. And one of them is consistency. So it's easier for people to like someone, something, a brand or a company, if there is consistency, because that creates trust. And then they know what to expect. And also, as soon as a human being had made up their mind about a viewpoint, they like to stick to it. So that's definitely something that you should keep in mind when communicating as a brand.
Yeah, and probably not something that's also very, very hard to do, especially in times of crisis or when you have to make difficult decisions.
Yeah, but I think you can maneuver it by explaining to the users why you're making certain decisions. So, like, I agree with you. Today, you need to be fast moving and you need to iterate all the time. So in one way, flexibility is key. But I do think that if you come back to the core and come back to the core values and you explain it carefully for the users, they will understand and accept. And that is another thing that I normally talk to marketeers about, that you should communicate with your users as if they are your best friend, because, you know, you can never talk to them as if they don't understand or, you know, are somewhere remote or you don't have a relationship to them. So you need to build almost like a relationship. Think about them as your friends.
If we translate all these insights and go back to the sort of the founding days of a hypothetical startup somewhere who hasn't made their first marketing move, as it were, how do you? What are the if we assume a situation where they don't have a marketing person yet in their team? What are the sort of quintessential skills that need to be held by the founders, or at least kept in mind when eventually maybe the first marketing hire is being made, or maybe the first marketing dollar is being spent, or marketing euro, because we're in Helsinki right now?
Yeah, no, I would come back to what we kind of just spoke to, and I think normally the founder always has an idea of what they want to achieve and why, and it's that idea that you as a marketeer connects with, and then your job is to take that and translate it into a whole different set of kind of assets so that you can roll out a marketing plan and a communication plan. But normally the founders have the core of the essence of the company in their minds, and one good example of how to kind of distill it or crystallize it could be, you know, practice an interview situation and tell yourself, if I can get 3 things across in this interview, and, you know, when the readers tomorrow look back and remind or think about an article, what are the key things that they took away after having read the article with me? What is the most important thing that I want to get across? Normally that is tied to your brand and who you want to be and why you matter. So I would say that is a good kind of exercise to do. 3 core things. If I can only, you know, what would be an ideal headline be? And if there would only be 3 bullet points that people took away from this article, what would they be? So I think that is a good start. And then when hiring someone, you should think about a person who, you know, same way as you always source for talent, and someone that you have a good chemistry with and that understands what you want to achieve, so that they can sort of take all of the things that you have and then, you know, make it even bigger and run with it.
How did that translate into? Did Spotify have someone doing marketing before they hired you? You said you entered as the global head of marketing, so I assume there was maybe someone doing something more local stuff already.
No, I was the first one, and the jokes in the beginning were that I was the only one who couldn't code.
Yeah,
I don't think that's really true, but it almost felt like it. So. Actually, we had funny conversations in the beginning, and I remember giving a presentation to the team where I actually convey them of why we should build a brand and why it matters. Because there were, you know, people that thought, oh, we should just be the matrix of music. We should be this underlying technology. We don't need a consumer brand. So I entered a company that was very strongly kind of product and tech led, and I needed to sort of explain why I thought it mattered. But I also think it's super important, of course, to have a product that delivers upon the values and promises that you make as a marketeer. So I think with Spotify, it was a good combination of a product that over-delivered and also a communication strategy that was effective.
When you enter a company like Spotify, I had actually no idea about this scenario where there was basically no sort of brand identity starting to materialize yet, and there was actually resistance. So, when you come into a situation like that, what are the first strings that you start to pull at or start to notice? Like, okay, this is the thing that we can use. Or like, what are the sort of narrative avenues that you find for the first time in this sort of blank slate?
So I think it starts already when you meet the founders. So I could already, one of the aspects of why I got super excited about Spotify was because I felt that Daniel and Martin were no ordinary business guys running around Stockholm. They were quite extraordinary, and they are extremely inspiring to listen to, and they describe what they want to build with the product. So I had a lot of meetings with them where I got the chills, like it was goosebumps. I remember one meeting, we met up at 4:00 in the afternoon and I didn't leave until 9:00 in the evening, and I was kind of 4 hours delayed to my dinner. But that was because we had so many ideas of what we could build with this product, what we could do, and how we could communicate it. So there, for me, it felt like an endless sea of opportunities to communicate this. And I think that is one of the things that kind of made both them and me excited about the opportunity of working together. So from my perspective, I had a feeling already before I joined that here there is something super strong, almost like an unpolished diamond that I, as a communicator, can kind of polish up and communicate it externally. There was like a lot of substance and a lot of excitement. But then more kind of tactical when I joined, what I actually did in the beginning was that I held a workshop with everyone at the company. And at the time, we were just 11 people. And I bribed them with popcorn. And then we had like a 2-hour workshop where we talked about who are we, why do we matter, why do we believe that we will succeed and no one else will, and kind of assessed out some of the core values of Spotify that lay the foundation of the brand positioning.
Yeah. Going back to the hypothetical startup that Isak mentioned, once you make the first marketing hire, as Daniel and Martin made in this case, what are some things you as a founder need to learn to be able to manage your first marketing person? Also considering that maybe that isn't your strong suit or something that you are, as gifted in other things.
Yeah, I mean, people have different preferences here, but for me, what I thought was great with how we did it at Spotify was that we said in the beginning, let's hire based on drive rather than perfect resume. So we had a lot of people, I mean, many also from the music industry that applied for jobs at Spotify. But we said, let's not get someone who have done this before or have a view of how it should be done. So I was, in that way, a kind of blank slate. I didn't have any preferences of this is how you normally do it as a CMO. I came in and I took the job kind of doing it the Spotify way from the first day. So I think that's one, hire based on drive and chemistry. And then make sure you get a lot of time with that person because the marketeer's job or the brand strategist's job is to understand what's going on in the founder's brain and then, translate that into a brand. And in order to get that understanding, you need to spend a lot of time together, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, so maybe buy a popcorn machine for the office.
That's never a bad investment.
No. But on a more tactical note then, because many founders think about this and a lot of the VC money actually that's being raised is spent, as I understand it, towards customer acquisition, towards marketing, towards Facebook ads, Google ads, the likes. But when do you think companies should start spending serious ad money, not just testing a few $100s on something, but actually starting to spend ad money? And what could you do also before that's relevant?
I think it's important to understand who your audience is, who you want to speak to, and also make sure that you have a product market fit and that you have technology that scales. So I would say that those are the 3 key things, because if you don't know who your main target audience is, it's going to be like pouring a cup of water into the ocean. Like your message will be diluted because the audience is so broad. Now you can do great targeted campaigns. So understand who your key priority is when it comes to audience and know that you have a product or service that you have found product market fit with. And then you can start spending money.
Are there some good cheap ways? I know everyone is now listening, like what ways are there? Because, oftentimes that takes, of course, also money and testing and failures on the way. But are there some good ways you've used to maybe not bust the bank finding that product market fit or finding that core audience? I
mean, I think you need to iterate all the time. have any kind of cheap tricks top of mind right now. I think it's all hard work. But I do also, like when you have a product that makes people delighted and excited, you feel it. Like you feel like there's a buzz and you have a certain inbound and a momentum and a vibe. And if you're lucky, you might also have like an external momentum going on. So with Spotify, we should not forget that in Sweden at the time, we had this huge debate about, illegal downloading, and we had even a political party that was fighting for that everything online should be free. So I think we, in a way, had a perfect storm. We offered something that wasn't available. So our product was by far 10 times better than the existing solutions out there. And at the same time, we had a massive debate going on in media already. And at the same time, we had the music industry with the broken business model. So there had a sense of urgency to it. And on top of that, we had a very inspiring founder team with this young guy from, coming from the suburb to Stockholm, who wanted to tackle the big music industry, which was a very kind of David and Goliath type of story. So we got a lot of press interest, which all kind of happened simultaneously in a positive way.
Yeah, I don't know at what point we want to dive into Spotify. I'm waiting. We've done it a little bit here already, but it's if you have any more questions about the hypothetical startup,
no,
please ask
I
them.
think the hypothetical startup is much more boring than the not so hypothetical Spotify.
Yeah,
so.
not so. Yeah,
Yeah.
Definitely, because I'm interested in the. I've asked you a few questions about the early days in Spotify already, but if you. Can you take us through those first years? Like, what were the sort of strategies you took with the communications? What were the first sort of moves that you made, and the first sort of things that you thought were relevant to communicate? And how did this sort of picture start to materialize? You mentioned that a lot of it came from Daniel, the founders, also, and a lot of the guys. But can you take us through those first years?
Yeah, sure. Sometimes when I think about the Spotify years, it's like a big green fog because we were so busy and working 24/7, being stressed out about the upcoming product launch or country launch or shutting down fires. So sometimes I wish I had taken more notes while at it. But I would say my first year, a few important things that I worked on was kind of defining the brand. So creating this workshop that later on led to the brand positioning document, so that I had a kind of platform from where I could start creating the communication. We were in stealth mode the first year. So my job at that time was pretty much to also communicate that no, you can't have an invite. And it's actually interesting because that book that I mentioned in the beginning of the show called Persuasion of Psychology talks about one of the tactics is scarcity. And the basic human behavior is that if something is limited or rare, or if there's a VIP line in the nightclub, if you can't have it, you want to have it. So the fact that I needed to say no and gather a lot of email addresses and engage people's interest in the beginning was playing to our strength. So later on, when we launched the beta test, we had a great momentum and a lot of people that wanted to try the service. For us, that was one of the most important ways to kind of sense check what we had built and how it resonated with our audience. I think from a communications and branding perspective, it was also a great way to make our users feel seen and heard and actually involved, because we tap their brains on, product development and ask them what you want to see, what are some of the most, desired features, etc. And I think coming back to that other Cialdini thing that he talks about, consistency, when people like your product, they give you a lot of, at least in our core users, a lot of time and devotion and dedication. And I think we kind of did a good job in helping them to talk about us with their friends. So when we gifted, 10 invites to some of the most influential music bloggers or journalists, etc., for them, it was an opportunity to be kind of Santa Claus or be someone in their community who could give something valuable to their friends. That is a great position to have as a brand. So I think we were good at taking an opportunity to help our users sort of transition into almost becoming fans and super users and ambassadors, and making it easy for them to talk about us and to share us with their friends.
Yeah, I think it's very important to remember that this was 2007, 2008, and nowadays this is like quite a common strategy. But back then that really wasn't maybe the way most companies did that. Because
At
now
that
when you
time,
look at
we had Gmail, who had actually just done it, so that was kind of our inspiration. But also it was a mere practical thing, because we wanted to ensure that the service held best quality ever. So we didn't want to scale it to millions of people if we had been able to. We wanted to kind of grow in a controlled way in order to make sure we had the best quality.
Yeah, we spoke to Rahul Vohra from Superhuman, who had basically exactly the same principle behind having the 300,000 plus people waitlist at the moment.
Yeah.
And this is clearly a strategy that now is quite like the modern way to do it for these consumer brands. But in general, what kind of companies do you think benefit from this model? Because this is probably not applicable to every company. Not everyone can afford maybe to say no, or maybe at least that's what entrepreneurs are thinking.
Yeah. No, I mean, software companies that want to have a controlled growth and that might have some limitations based on, licensing deals, etc., or where you want to product develop with your audience. So, entertainment companies, content companies, productivity companies, could potentially benefit from this tactic.
Did you get anything wrong in the early days of Spotify?
Yes. I mean, again, I wish I've listed everything in more detail, but we did mistakes all the time. I think, we were young and naive, and I think that was a good thing. We probably wouldn't have done it. I mean, maybe just speaking for myself, at least, if we understand how much work it was. So I think a portion of being naive is only a good thing. And also you become more creative and resourceful when you haven't done it before. You just cannot tackle it heads on. But I think if I look back, I would say that, growing fast is always hard, and scaling culture can be very hard. So thinking back, I mean, and I've said this to Daniel and Martin, but sort of launching in the US, I would have loved to have had the presence of the founders there even more, because I think it's really important to have them there in order to get the culture right from the beginning.
What was the hardest market to get right, to launch in maybe in terms of marketing or actually acquiring users?
Sorry, I'm laughing, but I don't know. But your question, and not based on data and stats, but my kind of headache. Looking back, I had a lot of headache with the French market because we had a strong competitor there, and also we were so Scandinavian and they were so local. So that was the market that took some time to crack.
Right, they have a local competitor in France, right? That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just realized. Yeah.
But maybe still taking one step backwards, I'm really interested in this book you've mentioned. Now I think we need to read it. It sounds like a good book.
Yes, I highly recommend it. Yeah.
Is the Cialdini one?
Yes.
Yeah.
We
I
need
can
to
send you the link afterwards so you can link to it in the show. But I would say it's a must read for every marketeer and communicator out there.
Yeah, exactly. But touching on the book and touching on that, we touched obviously a bit on the brand and what makes it great. But maybe from the angle of the book, what do you think separates a good consumer brand from something that's truly great as Spotify that actually... And maybe one question I've had for myself is that how much, because this is impossible to answer, I think, but still as a thought for both of you, how much of a great brand is kind of something that you look at in hindsight? Because when you look at like brands, and if you look at Apple, you look at Nike or Coke or whatever, obviously they are well known, but they're also well known as a function of being so well known. And I'm thinking how much is it because of a great branding effort and then you kind of in reverse or in hindsight, show everyone that this is what we did to succeed, and how much of it is also just pure timing, pure business success. They had good timing and the great business model, and then they kind of had a good enough brand that now is considered great because of the success.
Yeah, considered iconic. I agree. No, I think definitely some part of the story is written afterwards with the book that the Nike founder has written has probably manifested that brand even stronger, even though you haven't experienced the brand firsthand. So yeah, interesting perspective. And I agree with you. But a few kind of takeaways for me why I think Spotify and other brands, or I'll speak to Spotify since that's my core experience. But I do think that your product needs to be stellar in order to create a strong brand, because you want to deliver upon the brand promises. So the fact that we had a product that was kind of surprising people with that delightfulness, it was, when you talked about, we're a digital music service, people didn't really get that excited because there were other music services out there. We had Rhapsody and, Groove Shark and other music services. But something in the way we built the product made people impressed. I personally think that it was the speediness of it. There were no buffering, no delays. It felt like you had the songs on your computer. So there was a portion of delightful and surprise, in a way kind of over delivering and under promising, if you like. So a good product that is 10 times better than what's already out there. And for us also like a true and kind of concrete problem that we were solving. Because at the time, there were no easy way to play music legally online. So when you searched on Google or Alta Vista, that was big at the time, there were back in the day. And Martin actually worked there. So that was probably also why we always use that in our example. But if you typed Madonna, you never got like, oh, here's a link, click and press play and listen to her song. You got articles, pictures, dodgy links, etc. So there were no solution in place similar to the one we had in mind. And then I think also we did a good job in kind of being clear in our communication. And I think there's so many choices for users out there today. We are bombarded with communication all day, every day. And we want to make it easy for people to like you and to choose you out of all of the apps that you can download. And you only have one opportunity to make that first impression. And then you need to sort of deliver and stick to it. And I think we did that well. So again, being clear in who you are and why you matter, and then having a consistency in your communication.
Yeah. I do like your perspective is interesting, because I do sort of find that I don't know about the hindsight part in particular, but I don't know if you agree with this, Sophia. Like sometimes when I hear this, doesn't apply to this episode or this sort of discussion, but sometimes when I hear like people talk about marketing, describe it sometimes sounds like explaining a joke. Like when you explain a funny joke, like first it's funny, like it has all the sort of parts in it, like when you explain a brand, but then you start sort of deconstructing it, you start explaining the parts and why it works and what part of this is like sort of calculative strategy and how much of this is sort of cognitive psychology and how much of this is like storytelling, and then you start understanding it more, but it sort of loses the sort of tangibility of what it actually is as a whole. Like, do you find that there's sort of this type of like one part at least intangible artistry that when it comes to sort of understanding how to build a brand, or can it all just be understood intellectually?
That is an interesting question. I think there's a portion of it, for me at least. I mean, everybody does it differently, and I'm not saying that this is how it should be done. This is just my experiences that worked for me. I think you need to have a sort of soul, a DNA of a company. And once you have that ingrained, then there are plenty of ways that are fun and interesting and interactive, where how you can communicate that to the users.
As you said, you've started angel investing, and you work at Atomico, and now you work at Cherry Ventures. So you've invested in different brands now along the way, both personally and through these ventures. How have you managed to take your learnings and apply them to these companies? And have you been able to help founders understand marketing better?
I think you need to ask them about it. But I, of course, have those conversations, and I find them super interesting and inspiring. I haven't done like a product out of it. I haven't put it down in like, this is the go-to guide. It's more me organically sharing, bouncing ideas, coaching and guiding, because I think there's no such a thing as this is how you do it, because it's always going to be different. But I think it's all about, helping people to be the most authentic them as a brand. And then the tactics is, as we talked about, they're not set in stone. There's something that you come up with and that sort of expands and where you need to iterate and test your way forward. So I don't know if that was a good answer to your question, but normally for me, how I do it is that I have conversations with marketeers and CEOs and founders and share some of my learnings. And I hope that have inspired and maybe help them avoid some of the mistakes and pitfalls that we did.
Yeah, could you maybe share some of the companies you're involved with through Cherry Ventures or personally, so maybe people can check out what they are doing and just if they're interested in these companies?
Yeah, sure. One company I'm involved in is called Aura Ring, Finnish company that I
have one here actually. Yeah, so
yeah, really like it, and I'm a big user myself. I think people should check that one out. I have invested in Clue, which is a femtech company for women who wants to understand their health better. Very interesting one as well. From a branding perspective, there's one called Day that are also focusing on female health and have launched a pain relieving tampon that I think is an interesting one from a brand building perspective. Here in Sweden, there's an insurance company called Hedvig that I've invested in, actually together with Cherry. But I was an angel and they came in as a fund. There's another one called Sana Labs that are doing personalized learning through AI. Super interesting when you talk about education at scale and how fast we can develop as a society when you implement reskilling. I'm looking at a list here I have on my wall. That's why I'm looking.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but I think those are a few of the companies that I would recommend people to check out.
Yeah, they've all clearly listened to your branding advice because I at least knew all of them. So something has been done right. So.
Okay, that's good. Yeah.
This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Sophia, for joining us.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope it was somewhat useful.
It was absolutely very useful. And thank you to everyone who tuned in, listened, or watched the YouTube video. And leave a comment and tell us what your favorite brand is. And see you next time. Bye-bye.
Great. Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Bye. Thank you.